research method to assess the quality of the learning design in games. I think it's best that you adjust my volume up if I'm a bit low. If you're allowed to do that here. Yeah, I'll just keep going then. Yes, to find better methods of evaluating the learning methods used in games. And they do this by using a mixed method approach that involves utilizing multiple research methods for learning design to identify more problem areas than can be identified using any single one. This study uses both qualitative and quantitative methods, so it's a bit different than most studies we've looked at, as it requires a lot more work from the researchers. And this paper presents a case study to justify their choices for this method. So here's the method. It's a 7-step method for evaluating the learning design. Step 1 is to chart the learning curve of the game, which involves charting complexity and a few things we'll talk about later. Then step 2 is to recruit participants and analyze the player expertise. Then you have to record the gameplay in a rich multimodal manner, which we'll get back to. Then you'll have to analyze the participant performance of the individual participants and use that to identify game sections where problems have arisen. And then you have to do qualitative analysis on those problems. And the last step is to develop design recommendations based on your analysis. So this is a case study of the game Portal. If any of you aren't familiar with it, Portal is a 3D first-person puzzle game, which gradually increases in complexity by introducing new mechanics and new takes on old mechanics as you go on. The game is based around using portals to navigate through a 3D environment and solve puzzles. There may also be a cake in the game, but we can't be sure of that as more science is required. So I will be presenting it like this, where the method is on the left side and the specific case is on the right side. So for step 1, you have to create a record of the ideal solutions, which for puzzle games is quite simple, but can be challenging for games which don't have as clear step-by-step solutions to their problems. And then you have to chart out the complexity. For Portal, the ideal solutions had been recorded in another study that was based around puzzle design in games, and they used the ideal solution here to chart the red line, which is optimal actions. We'll get back to this chart later when we analyze the rest of the chart. So step 2 is to recruit participants and analyze player expertise. For this method, it's best to have a small number of participants, as you have to do quite a lot of interaction with them and do interviews and have in-depth talks with the people. So having a lot of participants would be challenging, and it's important to have participants of varying expertise levels, so that you can test all the aspects of the game to see if anything breaks either by not being explained well enough or by subverting what an experienced player might expect. You use a questionnaire to determine the expertise of the players. This questionnaire has to be customized for each game you're testing, as expertise will vary greatly depending on what kind of game you're testing. And then you divide the participants into novice, intermediate, and expert categories. Novices might be the most important category because they will give you a good indication of the base learning design of the game. But as we'll see later, it's also important to have the other groups, as there might be something in the design that breaks the other categories. So for this study, they had 14 participants from a university. There were 5 female and 9 male. The average age of the participants was 25 years. And one of the requirements to participate was that they were all familiar with first-person games and playing using a controller, as they wanted to remove the hardware and the basic how to play a game from the equation and rather focus on the specific design of the game. So out of the 14, there were 4 experts, 3 intermediates, and 7 novices. And then step 3 is that gameplay is recorded in a rich multimodal manner, where you have to record the participant's performance in all the relevant game sections you wish to analyze. You have to record the data on all the player interactions with the game, and you have to record the data on the player experience, either by having them talk aloud while they play, or having them explain after the fact what they were thinking at the time. So for this study, they were using a professional user experience lab that was set up to mimic a living room with a couch and a TV. They played the game on Xbox 360, and they had set up video cameras and microphones to record how the participant behaved and what they were saying aloud. And they had also set up a way to capture both the gameplay and the input from the player. So they had a researcher that encouraged the participant to explain what they were thinking while playing. But they were also, if they found that challenging, they could also do it afterwards. And after their gameplay session, there was a short interview about where they would go into depth on any problems they encountered and what they felt about the game and the challenge level in general. Step 4 is to analyze the participant performance. You have to extract and analyze all the performance data you've gathered, and then you have to compare it to the ideal solution you charted in stage 1. And then you should break the analysis down for each of the different player types you have in your study. For this study, they only focused on the first 10 levels, as very few participants got any further than that during the allotted time. They charted the average of all the players, as well as charting the averages for each of the player types. Based on the findings here, Portal does appear to be a well-designed game with a good learning curve, as the player behavior seems to follow the optimal curve quite closely. But it does identify a few obvious problem areas that will be talked about a bit later. As you can see from the green curve, novices struggled a lot on levels 3, 5, and also on 6, but that is not as apparent here. While you may notice that on level 8, the intermediate players struggled a lot. But you can see the average curve does follow the optimal curve quite well, and the purple and orange curves that indicate the experienced expert and intermediate players follows it very closely. So now we get to step 5, where you have to identify the game sections where the problems have arisen. So a well-designed game will give the players the necessary competence to complete their levels in a decent time. And you can notice players that lack that competence will struggle with the clearing puzzles. So in the graph we got from step 4, we can identify where there might be problems. And in the portal case, it's quite apparent that there are some problems with the learning design in levels 3, 5, 6, and 8. As you can see from the table, the number in brackets behind the L and the number is the optimal number of actions to solve the puzzle. And as you can see in level 3, the optimal actions is 4, and the novices spent 58 actions on in main, and that seems to indicate that there is a big problem with something that is introduced in that level. And you can see that for the other levels as well, that the experts closely follow the optimal number of actions, while novices and also for level 8 intermediates seem to deviate quite a bit. And after you found out where there are issues, you have to conduct a qualitative analysis of those problems. You have to identify the critical incidents in your data where there are big problems and what might cause them. Here you have to create a per player table to list every player action and thought and interview question to find out what went wrong in that specific level for each of the players. And then you have to do a deductive analysis of what broke down. And a breakdown here is defined as either an action breakdown where someone fails to execute something, a understanding breakdown where the player might not be aware of what they should do next, an involvement breakdown where they might get bored or frustrated and walk away from the game, and the breakdowns can be separated into major and minor category, where major breakdowns are things that cause players to get stuck and not progress, while minor breakdowns are smaller issues that might be simply annoyances. So for Portal, it was obvious that you need to investigate the levels 3, 5, 6, and 8. Yes. And they have several strategies they observed players attempting when they got stuck, which include trial and error, repetition, trying to get a hint, and so on. And they observed that most of these strategies were tried out to some degree. And what they found for the specific levels was that level 3 and 5 is based on the same lack of knowledge, the same problem, which is about how the basic functionality of portals and portal travel. They found that level 6 might be due to a poor introduction of a new mechanic, which confused a lot of players because the hints about what they were supposed to do might have been a bit vague. And they found that the major issue in level 8 was level design. So then after you've analyzed all the problems, you have to come up with your design recommendations. That's the last step. So you have to base this off the qualitative analysis of the breakdowns that occurred. And then when you have a list of recommendations to improve the design, you should go discuss the design with the developers so that they can improve their learning design and hopefully avoid these problems. In Portal, they identified three main problem areas. The first one, which they saw in level 3 and 5, was the basic understanding of how portals work. The second one was that you need to improve the hint system and how players was introduced to new game mechanics. And the third issue was that for level 8, the level design caused one of the hints to be obscured. So their suggestions, well, for the first issue, there are a lot of different suggestions that might work. Either make it more obvious how you should progress through the level by giving it a more linear feel. Then they might pick up on how the portals work earlier. But this problem is quite difficult to solve very simply. The other two problems are a bit easier, as more clear indications and a more clear voiceover, which is how they were introduced to the new mechanic. If the voiceover had been clearer, there might have been less confusion about what to do. And for the last one, it would simply have been to lead the players down another path so that they got a better overview of the level before they started solving the problem. Now for the discussion. This paper has been about mixing quantitative behavioral methods and qualitative experiential methods. And what they believe is that they can detect more subtle problems with player understanding than the other methods can alone, and identify more nuanced issues that might not be as easy to classify using other methods. They believe that this method will fit very well with a small-scale user testing that is often already implemented in the game development process, that they just have to think about it a bit differently. And what this study does support the earlier research that Portal is well designed, but they do identify some improvement possibilities that were not identified by other studies. And it's very important to recruit participants with varying levels of expertise. As we saw, the intermediates had a breakdown on a level where novices weren't that bothered. Some of the limitations here is that expertise can be very hard to classify, and you will need to create a new way to classify it for the different types of games you might use this on. And that it requires small user groups, as doing the interviews and the qualitative analysis would be nearly impossible with a very large sample. So the conclusion, they conclude that more work is required to find out if this method can be applied to during the game development of a game to actually improve the level design, or if you need a more solid game before you can do this. They also conclude that this is only the initial attempt at a comprehensive method for identifying problems with how learning is structured in games, and that they can't they can't conclude definitely that this is a good method until more work has been done. Any questions?
Recording. Right, yeah. Okay, because I've got both Discord and my recording going, I have to add multiple audios. So, in terms of the question, I think. Oh, wait a minute. I've got. That's better. My my audio things had gone all over the place. The reason for looking at this paper is partly about looking at those methodologies, and so we have some questions that have been written into Discord, and we also have Joachim, who can also ask some questions, and I'll just go back. Oh, I'm stuttering a bit, Simon. Okay, if I'm stuttering, what I will do is I will stop streaming